It was 6 o'clock in the morning when Aurora arrived in New York. The tug helped us into our berth in the Manhattan cruise terminal. As the city never sleeps, all the lights were on, and we were treated to a spectacular view from our balcony. Straight after breakfast, we set off down the Henry Hudson Parkway and passed the USS Intrepid, a retired aircraft carrier which is now a naval museum. Next we came to the water feature. Just beyond the fountain at Pier 83 is the Circle Line Cruises Terminal. Here we took one of their boats for an hour-long trip to see the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island, using our hop-on, hop-off bus ticket. We sailed down the Hudson River, passing iconic buildings such as the Empire State and the One World Trade Center. In the distance we could see the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges. Then we came to the Statue of Liberty. The statue, a gift from France, is 151 feet tall and weighs 225 tons. When the statue arrived, the city of New York couldn't afford to build the pedestal to stand it on, so a local newspaper started a drive for donations to finish it. Just a short distance away is Ellis Island, where immigrants to America were processed between 1892 and 1954. We returned to the pier and took the bus to Times Square, named after the New York Times newspaper. It's one of the world's busiest pedestrian areas. Filled with brightly lit billboards and advertisements, it has been described as the crossroads of the world. There are lots of people selling bus tickets here, but we'd bought ours online from home. The stops are clearly shown at the side of the road. We set off on the Blue or Uptown route and stopped first at Bryant Park. It was lunchtime and filled with office workers eating their sandwiches. One group were playing pool. One of the features of the park is the games area, where drafts, chess and backgammon sets are left out for anyone to use. There's also a kiddies roundabout. You can even learn to juggle. There are regular music concerts in the park as well. We got back on the bus and rode to our next stop at Grand Central Terminal. In the heart of this Manhattan architectural masterpiece is a shop where you can buy handmade artisan bread. The building is a bustling thoroughfare and meeting point for people from all over New York and beyond. The main cathedral-like hall has enormous double-glazed windows with passages between the two layers of glass. It's lit by magnificent chandeliers. On the lower floor there's an old-fashioned shoe shine stand. There's also a food hall and a dining area in the arched passages. Not only that, but you can even catch a train here. Across the road at Pershing Square we got on the bus again and drove through the streets of Uptown. The Chrysler Building is adorned with enormous replicas of car bonnet mascots. It doesn't matter what time of day it is, the streets are crowded, but at least this gave us a chance to look at the fancy ornamentation on many of the buildings. This is the Metropolitan Art Gallery with its fountains. We left the bus on 5th Avenue at Conservatory Water Boating Lake, which is overlooked by apartment blocks. One of these is home to a nesting pair of red-tailed hawks, which might be a worry for the ducks on the lake. Central Park Model Yacht Club members race their wind-powered remote-controlled boats every Saturday morning from March to November. The rest of the week the public can rent boats from the kiosk. Back on the bus again, we went round to the other side of the park at Columbus Circle. This is where you can go for a carriage ride around the park. It costs about £42 for 20 minutes, but that's for the whole carriage. The horses have to compete with pigeons for their food. We saw this tiny police car, and Chris was asked if she wanted to get in it. She settled for a cuddle and a picture. The park is 2.5 miles long and half a mile wide, and is visited by 25 million people every year. We had a good look round Columbus Circle before we went back to the bus stop. Whilst we waited for the bus, we were amazed by how many taxis went past. We drove past Carnegie Hall on our way back to Times Square. The Red or Downtown route also starts from Times Square. This covers the southern end of Manhattan. It passes some of the most iconic buildings in the city, starting with the Empire State, once the tallest building in the world. Next came the MetLife Tower in Madison Square, previously an insurance company and now the Edition Hotel. Immediately beyond this is the Flatiron Building at the junction of 5th Avenue and Broadway. Its name comes from its resemblance to an old-fashioned clothes iron. The streets of New York echo to the sounds of sirens. All the buildings have water towers on the roof. Water has to be pumped to these to give sufficient pressure at the taps. Many of the buildings have rooftop and balcony gardens. Turning into Broadway, we next came to Foley Square, with the Supreme Court and Triumph of the Human Spirit statue. The New York Municipal Building is engraved with all the names the city has had. We got a quick glimpse of the entrance to Brooklyn Bridge before we entered Wall Street, centre of the financial district. Trinity Church was a refuge from the dust and debris after the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers. Wall Street subway station is right outside. The Charging Bull statue stands outside the New York Stock Exchange, and people queue to touch it for luck. Just beyond the Charging Bull is Bowling Green Park. We got off at the next stop to go on the Staten Island ferry. This free service runs the 5¼ miles between Manhattan and Staten Island in about 25 minutes. It offers some of the best views of the city skyline and the Statue of Liberty. There's little, if anything, to do on the island, so most tourists simply take the next ferry back. In the shadow of the Manhattan and Brooklyn bridges is the heliport, right next to the Manhattan ferry terminal. Just across the street from the terminal is Battery Park. Here is the East Coast Memorial to missing servicemen who lost their lives in the Atlantic Ocean in World War II. Back on the bus, we drove up West Street towards the One World Trade Center. This is the main building of the rebuilt World Trade Center complex, replacing the Twin Towers. It's the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. The High Line is a disused overhead railway, which is now a linear park. The bus finally dropped us back at the Intrepid Museum, where the evening sun set over the carrier and her planes, at the end of 3 very enjoyable days.